I hope you realize we do serve a great God. We're in a series that we started last week entitled Questions Jesus Asks. When you look at the New Testament, there are a number of questions that Jesus asked. It's hard to define exactly how many there are because, sometimes it's the same question in 3 or 4 of the Gospels. So, is that one question or is that 4 questions? But there are 170 plus times that we have a question from Jesus in the Gospel accounts. Jesus gets asked about 100, 120 plus questions in his ministry, his 3-year ministry, that we have recorded in the Gospels. It's interesting, out of those questions, he only answers 8. And as we go through this series, we'll eventually get to those and talk about those. But as we look at this whole idea here of the questions that Jesus asks, each one of them gives us some insight as to areas that are important for our lives and areas that were important to Jesus. And so last week we talked about from Matthew chapter 16, the idea that Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "Hey, what's everybody saying about me?" And they said, "Well, some people think you're John the Baptist, some people think you're Elijah, some people think you're one of the prophets." And Jesus then spins it and looks at the disciples and says, "But who do you say I am?" And it became a pivotal point. It's actually a pivotal story in the life of Jesus Christ, because what happens is, from that point on in the ministry of Jesus, his focus shifts from the crowds to the disciples. And so there is a shift in the focus of Jesus' intensity in his ministry. And when he talks to his disciples, he primarily starts talking about suffering. Now the question we're going to deal with this morning, so the question was a question of faith. Who is Jesus Christ to you? Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? It's not about ritual or religion or something that you want. Do you have a personal faith, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? And like we said, the question is a question of faith. And our question last week to us was this: who is Jesus Christ to you? Because if he's not your personal Savior, you're not going to understand the rest of this. So we kind of laid that foundation. We also talked about the reason Jesus asked so many questions. Because you need to understand, in the American educational system, in our thinking, we focused on information. We focus on data. Somebody stands up in front of a class. They teach you information. They then quiz you on that information. Do you know this information? Depending on how well you know that information, they give you an A, B, C, D, or F. Do we even give Fs anymore? I don't know. But we should. Okay, yes, we should. Yeah, okay. So anyway. So, we go through this process, and we test information by saying, how much of the information I gave you can you give me back? That's the American education system. In the Jewish world, that's not how it worked. In the Jewish world, it was not about information and you being able to spit back information. In the Jewish world, learning occurred by discussion. In other words, it wasn't so much the information as much as it was reflection and questions. And you would answer questions with questions, and you would start to explore the topics. I go back to my favorite Jewish joke about this. Why does a Jewish person always answer a question with a question? The answer is, why shouldn't a Jewish person answer a question with a question? That's the mindset of the Hebrew mind. So when Jesus comes onto the scene, that's how he primarily teaches, with questions. It's not necessarily that you can spit back the data. It's more the idea that you reflect on, you internalize, you think about the question. So this morning, we're actually going to take and springboard off of where we were last week in Matthew chapter 16. Because as I said, the ministry of Jesus shifts. Now he's going to start talking to his disciples. So listen to what he says. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me, they'll find it. In other words, Jesus takes the worldview and flips it on end. And he says, the world will say, get all you can. If you're going to follow me, give it all away. Give it all up. Don't make your life about you. That's what he says. He says, you really want to follow me? He said, you lose your life. You don't make your life about you. He said, you really want to lose your life? Make it all about you. He talks about discipleship. And he's going to continue on as he goes on further in his teaching to his disciples. He's going to talk about suffering as part of discipleship. Here he introduces the idea, and he says, take up your cross. You need to understand, in this culture, the cross was a horrible thing. We look at the cross, we put jewelry on with crosses on it. Okay? Here's your modern equivalent, and I've used this before. You know how when they put somebody to death with lethal injection, they strap them on that table? Okay? Can you imagine getting a piece of jewelry and say, oh, look, I got a piece of jewelry with the executioner's table on it? That's the analogy in the first century with the cross. It was not associated with anything good. And Jesus said, you want to follow me? Take up the cross. Deny yourself. That's going to become an important part today. And follow me. Then Jesus gets into his question, and here's what he says. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? What can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man, he's going to come in his Father's glory with his angels. And then he'll reward each person according to what they have done. This isn't about salvation. This is about, again, discipleship. You're going to follow me. Here's what you're going to find. There's coming a day in which I'm going to honor. I'm going to reward those who have faithfully followed me. And so he asks the question here, what good is it if you get the whole world and you lose your soul? Or what can you pay for that will purchase your soul? That's the question that Jesus wrestles with as far as the appeal. So it's about discipleship. So let's wrestle with this just for a little bit, and then we'll get into some application. Here's a question. He starts and he says, what if, let's play a game here. What if you could get it all? I mean everything. I mean, your name, when they list the richest person in the world, you're it. When they list the best looking person in the world, you're it. When they talk about the most successful person in the world, you're it. What if you could get all of it? So what? So what? If you gain it all, so what? Then he adds another element to this. And what did it cost you? What did it cost you to get all of that? Because you see, what he's dealing with is he's forcing us to think about this. What is our purpose here? And that's my challenge to us today. This is a question of purpose. Last week was a question of faith. This is a question of purpose. What is your purpose on this planet? What is it? I like what one guy said. You're not ready to live until you know what you want written on your tombstone. One of the greatest challenges for me years ago was I thought about what words do I want on my tombstone. It's going to say James G. Thomas Jr. Born 8/21/61. Died, I don't know, whatever tomorrow is. Died that date. And then my family is going to have to sit down and come up with some words to describe my whole life. And again, they're paying by the letter, so they're not going to want to use a lot of words. What words do I want them to put on that tombstone that represent my life? The answer to that question tells you what's going to be important and what I want to do as far as my purpose in my life. What are those words going to be? You know, fun guy, great bowler, beat by a 3-year-old. I mean, really, what words do you want? That's what Jesus is asking here. He said, if you can gain it all, so what? What did it cost you? Because what he does here is he wrestles with this idea, and again, okay, I'm going here, all right, so just hang on. Wear steel-toed shoes, whatever you need to wear in church. So if I step on your feet, that's it. You know what he asks here? You know what the question really is here? That I think as a culture we need to really, really be honest about? How much is enough? Here he says the whole world. But here's my question to you. How much is enough? Because I don't think we ask that question anymore. We just keep going, yes, 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 yes. We accumulate. And by the way, I started this message, working on this message Monday. Does anybody know what Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday were this week? Farm Show in Vermilion. I don't care about the equipment. I do care about the Baumgar's DeWalt sale. How much is enough? And my wife, my loving wife, I told her, I said, I've got to go to this. I have to go to this. My wife looked at me and she just said, I want you to think seriously about whatever you buy. She didn't nag me, she didn't yell at me, she didn't, tell me about, and so as I'm standing there in line with 2 of these things in my hand, I'm going, do I really need 2? My answer was yes. But knowing that I was going to go home, I put 1 back. How much is enough? How much is enough? Guys, how many tools are enough? And those of you who've seen my tools know I'm preaching to myself here. Ladies, how many shoes are enough? I got to preach to my wife. I just preached to me. Really, how much is enough? Guys, how many cattle are enough? How much land is enough? At what point in your career are you going, that's enough, I'm happy to be there. I don't need to keep pushing the ladder to get harder and harder and harder. How much is enough? And you know what happens for us? We just keep saying, yes, 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 and we get more and more and more and more and more. And you need to understand, this was a piercing question for the disciples to think about, because what Jesus was trying to get them to do is to say, your life is not about you, your life is about God, and you're going to have to give up a whole lot of stuff in order to follow me. Peter, you're not going to be able to be a fisherman anymore. You're going to need to sell the boat because you're not going to need it. Which, by the way, is interesting. What happens when Jesus goes to the cross? What do the disciples do? They go back to what they did before, which insinuates to me they still had ties to the world before Jesus. And Jesus said, you got to give it up. So I think it's an important question. You have to understand, in the Jewish world, the Jews had a very interesting perspective when it came to things and accumulation and things like that. Here's some of the Jewish teaching. The Jews taught, the Hebrew people believed this. The soul is always more valuable than any possession. So that was in the Jewish mindset. That was ingrained in the Jewish culture. The Jewish people also believe this, that accumulation brings responsibility, not ownership. Now, let me say that again. Accumulation brings responsibility, not ownership. So in the Jewish mind, as they got stuff, they didn't see it as, I own this, I own this, I own this. They saw it as, I'm a steward, I'm responsible for this. So when they would hire 10 new people to work for them, they saw it not as ownership, I own these 10 people, but rather as stewardship. I now have 10 more people to take care of. Is how they saw it. So in their mind, what Jesus is teaching kind of goes along with this Jewish mindset and culture at the time as well. Here's what I thought was interesting. The rabbis taught that excessive accumulation was spiritually dangerous. And here's why. Here's what they said. The more possessions, the more worry. I want you to think about that for a second. The more possessions, the more worry. I'm going to preach to myself, okay? I have a lot of tools. I have DeWalt tools. It is a family division because my oldest son has Milwaukee tools. My youngest son, the wiser one, has DeWalt tools. Okay? It's a big debate in our family, all right? So I've moved to cordless. So now I buy a lot of batteries, okay? You know what I have to worry about now? When it gets cold, are those batteries in the car or are they in the heated shed? Are those batteries charged when I go to need them? Before cordless, all I had to do was find an outlet. But now I've got all these other issues to use my tools. Do I think cordless tools? I think cordless tools are from God. I mean, they are awesome. But there's more stuff to worry about. That was the Jewish mindset. And what I would say is, so my wife went through this death cleansing thing, getting rid of everything, Fortunately, I kept moving, so I was still around. But, she just started getting rid of stuff. And here's what I found, it rubbed off on me, so I got rid of a few things. And I'm finding out it's a lot. My office, when I don't have all the stuff around me in the office, it's kind of nice to work in there. We got to ask ourselves how much is enough. We really do. We got to be honest with ourselves because we're in a culture that forces, that imposes this idea of consume, gather, more. And it doesn't help us. It doesn't help us spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, all the way across the board. And this is what Jesus looks at him and says, so if you can get the whole world, then what? What's it cost you? What's it cost you? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go down this road for a minute because this is where I've always been as a pastor for this church. This has been a part of my life for years. Let me give you the background for it. Years ago, I had a dear friend, kind of a mentor guy in my life, and one of the things that he used to always challenge me with is he used to say this, let me ask you something. He said, if time, money, and people were no object, what would you do for God? And it was a great question. And then he would spin it and say it this way, because you understand, time, money, and people are not an issue for God. Don't let that be the reason you're not doing something for God. God is bigger than all those things. So I have always looked at my life, I've looked at ministry in those three categories. As a church, every year, and when we send out our financial thing here at the end of the month, for people who have given a way that we can record it, we will talk about those three areas of our ministry, time, money, people. And that's kind of where I want to go, because this is what Jesus is saying with this question of purpose. The eternal has more value than the earthly or the temporary. The soul is incredibly valuable. The soul of a person has incredible worth. We were talking about this morning in Sunday school. One of the guys who was speaking, it's a whole team of people who speak, but one of the guys who was speaking said this. He said, when it comes to your children, he said, what you need to think about is how long are they going to live? He said, because when you can figure out how long they're going to live, then you'll know what you need to do. Then he spins it this way. You know how long your children are going to live? Forever. So you better invest in things that are eternal with your kids. There's a lot of truth to that. So this morning, I want to talk about the three areas that I always look at for my life, for this ministry, and I want to challenge you in your life. First of all, the issue of time. Are you spending your time on things that are eternal or things that are temporary? Be honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself, I'm going to tell you how to do it. Look at your calendar this past week. Your calendar will tell you what your priorities were this week. Whether you like it or not, it will reflect your priorities. It will reflect how you spend your time. And you need to ask yourself, was that a good use of my time? Well, you know, and again, me too. I'm so busy. Have you ever thought about this for a second? You want to know I think that Satan's greatest tool in Satan's toolbox in 2026, you know what I think it is? We're going to keep you busy. You think about your schedule. I talk to retired people all the time. Well, how's it going now that you're in retirement? I'm busier than I ever was. I don't even know how I got anything done before I retired. Because why? Because Satan continually keeps us busy. And here's why. One guy said it this way in a book called The Tyranny of the Urgent. He said, what Satan encourages us to do is to stay busy so that we're constantly doing what's urgent and not what's important. And most of us are driven by what we call the tyranny of the urgent. We're continually putting out fire after fire after fire after fire after fire, so we don't have time to focus on what's important. And so what happened? You spend all of your life focusing on what's urgent, 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 urgent. Then your kids graduate and you go, I don't know where the time went. Because you never got to do what was important with your kids because you were always doing what was urgent. This is so important. You have to step back and ask yourself, is what I am doing important? Is this part of my plan? Is this part of what I want? Instead of being driven by this constant calendar and this constant thing. Because, look, so many of us don't know how to say no. In fact, let's practice this morning, all together. No. Now let's try it one more time. No. One more time. No. I'm giving you permission this week to say no. Honey, will you unload the dishwasher? Yes. Okay? Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard? Because you see, God has given you time is the great equalizer. We all get the same amount. Nobody here gets extra. We all get the same amount. It's all about how we use it. And some of you say, well, you know, I just don't have time to spend with God in the morning or afternoon, whenever you want to do it. I don't have time for that. No. You got the same amount of time everybody else did. Be honest with yourself. The reason you're not doing it is because it's not a priority. Be honest. So if you get it all, you gain the whole world, but it takes a toll on your soul? What are you doing? Second thing, money. Here's the easiest way to look at this. You want to know where your money went? Look at your bank account. How much of your money was spent on things that were eternal? Be honest with yourself. I use Quicken, and so about 3 or 4 years ago, we started putting everything in a category. Every dime we spend goes in a category somewhere. So I was working on a message. I thought, where did I spend my money last year? Quicken does a really nice thing. January 1, December 31st, put it all in percentages, throw it up on a chart for me. You want to know where the top 3 areas I spent my money last year? Housing, travel, and auto. I spent more money on travel than I did on auto expenses last year. You know what that says about me? Travel is important to me. And you want to know what I will tell you? Travel is important to me. You know why? Because it is one of the few times in my life that is carved out for just my wife and I in our marriage. I can lie to myself, well, yeah, but you gave to this and you gave to this and you gave, yeah, I did. But one top 3. I have to be honest. I have to be able to look at my money and go, okay, this is where I spend my money. And again, we have to be honest with ourselves about this. And we look at it and go, you know what? Well, this is important to me. Well, if this is important to me, then it's going to be reflected. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying sell your house and give it to God. Please don't do that. You got to have a place to live, and I don't want you living here. But I mean, honestly, you have to be honest with yourself about it. Stop and look at it. Does your bank account reflect what you say is important to you? Because there are people who are involved in eternal things that need our support. The other issue is people. And listen, we call this Holly Springs Bible Fellowship because we believe that spending time with people is important. Here's what I hear people say. And again, a lot of times I get this from farmers or hunters. Here's what they say. I don't need to go to church to worship God. I just worship God in the tractor, or I worship God in the woods, i.e. with a gun in my hand, waiting to shoot something. I don't need to worship God with people. Okay, let me be honest with you. If you are really going to worship God, people have to be involved. You know why? Because the God who created all of this beauty looked at it all and said, it needs people. And you know what he created? Man. And he looked at man, and you know what he said about man? He's by himself. He got to have somebody else. Why? Because God is first and foremost a social God as well. It's about people. If you'll think about it for a minute, the one thing that will outlast anything this world has to offer is people, because they're eternal. One of the things that I see happening, we don't have time for people anymore. I'm going to suggest that in our culture, there's a couple of things that we did that were really, really, they had more impact on our culture than we realized. One of them, I did it too, we enclosed our front porches. You remember when you drive by and see somebody sitting out on the front porch? Well, yeah, they had time to sit out on the front porch. Bingo! Why? Because they made sure they weren't busy. They were doing what was important, not what was urgent. They sat out on the front porch. And you know what they did? They talked. If you had a grandmother like mine, she shelled beans. You know, big long skirt, big long, doing beans. They'd sit on the front porch and talk. If you're like my grandfather, sat out there and smoked. They sat on the front porch. I'm not saying sit out on the front porch and smoke. I'm just, okay, so you understand. I'm saying that that was part of the culture. Then you know what we did? We built garages. You know what garages did for us? They put our cars inside so that when you drove by, you didn't know who was home and who wasn't. Subtle little things. Big cultural shifts. And what I would say to you is, look, and in fact, it was interesting. I had this discussion with somebody this week. We were talking about last year, looking back over it, and they said, you know what one of our favorite times was? At the last minute, we had somebody come over for supper or for lunch after church. Didn't even know if we were going to have enough food, but it was one of the favorite times that I had all of last year. I said, yeah. I said, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to develop a culture that's about people. And I'm going to challenge you with this because, listen, Jesus looked and said, look, you gain it all. At what cost? At what cost? What's your purpose? As you look at your time, as you look at your money, as you look at your social calendar of interacting with people, ask yourselves this. How much of that has an eternal dynamic to it? Because the eternal is always more important than the temporal. And that's what Jesus is trying. He's looking at the disciples saying, look, guys, I'm about ready to ask you to give up your life for me. So you can't make your life about you. And if you're going to make it about you, you're going to lose what's important. But if you'll make it about me, if you'll keep these kinds of things in mind, if you're willing to pay the price, you'll find out what life is really all about. But one of the things that you have to ask yourself is, what's it costing you to continue to live like you're living? What does it do for your soul? I want to challenge you because here's what I see. I see a lot of people that are burned out. I see a lot of people that are emotionally just beat up. I see a lot of people who are, you remember the little hamster wheel? And that hamster just runs faster and faster and faster, and the wheel goes faster and faster and faster, and when it's all said and done, the hamster steps off and goes, I haven't gotten anywhere. I see so many people doing that. We don't need to be doing that. We can look at it and say, God, look, I have a week in front of me. I'm going to depend on you to lead me to the right people that I can be a blessing and encouragement and help to. If I see somebody in need, I'm going to pry open my wallet. I'm going to try to do what I can to help them. And if I see somebody who could use my time, I'm going to invest it in them. You go, oh, but you don't know our calendar. You're missing the point. You're being run by the tyranny of the urgent, not what's important. And I think the greatest challenge for us is to learn to focus on doing, that's always been my prayer. Lord, help me to not get run by the tyranny of the urgent and to do what's important. I end with this. Jesus challenges the disciples to consider their purpose on this earth. Discipleship means that life can't be about you or me. Our lives have to focus on eternal things, not the temporal things of this world. What's it going to profit you if you get it all, but it's cost you your soul? Let's pray. Lord, help us. Easy to preach, hard to do. So God, as we head into this week, may we be sensitive to what you want us to do and not necessarily what our schedules demand and keep pushing us to do. Use us this week to be the people that you have designed and desire for us to be. These things we ask in your name. Amen. Let's